All right, so I have Grant Skeldon with me today. Grant, tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do for a living.
Yeah, so I just moved to Nashville to join Q Ideas, which basically I got married in the pandemic. 2 weeks later, moved and joined Q. We help Christians navigate faith and culture, but especially what I do is we do a lot of these private strategic events and especially retreats for some of the most high capacity young Christian leaders in the nation. Some of these could be next gen leaders, whether millennial and Gen Z, that are professional or Olympic athletes, that are speakers, authors, musicians, online influencers. We do have a special emphasis of gathering young Christian leaders with regional or national platforms outside of the church and representing Christ in culture. So yeah, we try to encourage them, give them community, make sure they finish well, and yeah, just help them navigate this unique time that they live in today.
That's awesome. So I brought you in for this conversation specifically because of how huge the Gen Z is in these Oscar nominees this year. I mean, to me, it's kind of miraculous. I know you've watched the video of me talking about this, and we've talked about some of the ideas and how incredible it is that the Gen Z seems to be the change agents. I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you was, since you work with this generation, is there anything different or special about this specific generation?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that come to mind that are different is they are growing up in a very diverse world. I think that diversity sometimes is used as this like topic of, man, we need to become more diverse in all these different sectors: business, church. Every sphere is thinking about diversity and representation, and I think sometimes the diversity conversation can be about just the past and the pain. And I think that's a necessary conversation. But also, I like to remind people to talk to Gen Z, because it's not that there's no problems there. It's just Gen Z, I think, could share from a different vantage point of like they're experiencing the beauty of diversity, the benefits of diversity, and they're growing. This has got to be the most biracial generation that's ever lived, as we're seeing diverse people come together and get married and have kids. And it just helps, I think, people that are born, even like myself, where I'm half Mexican, half South African, and I'm tapping into two different cultures and getting to see again, the benefits and the beauty of both those cultures. And so I think that creates a generation that has more empathy, a little bit more understanding, or just patience. I don't want to say that they're wiser. I just want to say that they're experiencing a little bit more diversity, as well as not even just that they see diversity, but also the world is a lot smaller for them. I think when institutions control the narrative and the media and the stories and the movies that were made, it kind of controlled, yeah, the narrative, as you will. But then with YouTube and online influencers and just how much easier I think travel is today. It seemed like I was reading about what travel was like 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and you had to actually like go to the airport and get a ticket and then go back home and come back later and have your physical ticket, or it was mailed to you. And just, yeah, people seem to like dress up. It was like a big deal to fly, and now it's almost like, dude, these guys are coming, the next generation's coming in like their PJs. Like, I just want to be comfortable, and I joke about it, but what it does is it makes the world smaller in two ways. As we have a generation it's not as scary to go to another country, and because you have other friends that have also done it, then you experience new worlds and new cultures, and again, see the beauty and the benefits of those cultures, and how different and how difficult it can be in other places, as well as the online influencers, as well as just having friends through gaming and all these different ways that you're exposed to a new world. I think it makes maybe even why this generation doesn't seem as patriotic as we've seen in the past, for better or for worse, whether it's, yeah, a generation that has maybe more of a, not American dream, but I want to change the world, and I more of a little bit more of a global perspective and empathy. But lastly, I would also say it's probably one of the most, or probably one of the least discipled, least mentored generations also. So you got a lot of passion without a lot of always wisdom or mentorship or guidance. It could sometimes be like a loose cannon, where you see a generation that's dying to be a part of something bigger than themselves. We saw that with the Coney 2012 video, where they didn't even know who Coney was. And if in 2012 that video was viral, and so many young people jumped on that. We saw that with the ice buckets on our head, if you remember that, Brian, where all of a sudden all these young people are so serious about ALS. And you got a generation that was looking for Pokemon, because that was like this big, it wasn't a cause, but it was like this online community that was a big fad, and everyone was doing it. You got them putting exons on their hand for ending human trafficking. And so I sometimes see that, but also see a passionate generation that's a little fickle sometimes. They're not following through, because ALS is still a big problem, but we don't see that kind of passion as much. Coney actually is literally still out there, and we don't see a generation as passionate about it. And so there's great things with a generation that wants to change the world. There's hard things when you have a generation coming from probably some of the most divorced and broken homes, and a generation that just surrounds themselves mostly with young people. They don't have a lot of deep core regular relationships with older people, and so sometimes it can feel, I say like Lord of the Flies, where you got a lot of young people that are asking advice on dating or whatever it may be from each other, and that can kind of turn into the blind lead the blind, even if it's passionately. And so, there's definitely some strengths, but there's also, I believe, some weaknesses as well.
That's so good, man. And it speaks to, I love what you're talking about of the world being smaller. I feel like that I may be partial because I have a 21-year-old boy and a 18-year-old girl, but I've watched them live their lives, and it's been a totally, from the digital world that they've grown up in, I see their world as a we, even though we see a lot of us and them in our world. Like you spoke to, you have a generation who grew up where they share each other's cars, right? With Uber, it's just like everything feels like a we in their world. And so it's great hope for me, because I feel like you're saying, they don't see as many borders as we see, and they don't see the territorialism that maybe we see, especially a generation like a boomer generation, where they grew up with war, they grew up with Cold War and so forth. There was always sort of an enemy afoot. And I've also questioned that too. Like, okay, well, yeah, but they've lived through, what we've dealt with politically with a lot of us versus them, and territorialism. And I've worried that would shape them. But I just have sort of this instinct feeling that their DNA is different because of the way they've been connected digitally. Do you feel like that's true? I know that's kind of what you were alluding to, but do you feel like their DNA is kind of different because of that, and they have the ability to cross barriers and borders like we're seeing with these movies?
Yeah, I do. I think that I often say that young people aren't cause oriented; they are community cause oriented. And what I mean by that is I get a lot of, especially nonprofits or churches, that are like, hey, why, if young people are so passionate to join a cause, which they are, then why is it so hard to get them to volunteer? Why is it so hard to get them to serve? And I have to say, it's not that they just want a cause. They have a propensity towards a cause, but they also want to join this like community that has a cause at the core of it, at the center of it. And so that's why I think, when I even use those examples of like the ice bucket challenge, I think that's a perfect one, because that was like overnight. I even remember I didn't even know what ALS was. I think a lot of young people didn't, but because there was this community around that cause, it's like, I don't, bigger than the problem of the fear of commitment that a lot of young people of all generations always have. Like, it's this, I don't want to commit until I know there's not something better. Like a lot of young people, it's maybe sometimes there's a fear of commitment, but I would say bigger than the fear of commitment for young people is the fear of missing out, or they call it FOMO. And I think that the FOMO was there with that community, with the cause, because it's like, oh, I want to go and do that. I don't want to miss out. Everyone else is doing it. I want to jump in. And I guess why that's important, especially to this concept of we, it's like, I'm getting left out, and I don't want to just continue this by myself, or I wasn't doing it by myself. But when everyone jumps in and there is something good and moral and virtuous, and even I would even add, especially, and I get to kind of almost feel like and get to be a hero, there is a desire for that It's why maybe the Avengers is one of the biggest movies for the next generation. Like, I
Team
want
up.
to be a hero, and I want to be a team of heroes. And so there's good in that, but yeah, there's difficult in that, because that means when ALS continues to be a problem like it is today, I just don't see that same kind of energy anymore. And it's not because the cause has gone away; it's because the community has gone away, the we has gone away. And so, yeah, I think there is this desire of we. Even we're seeing that a lot with Ukraine right now, of how quickly people in the next generation, borderline almost like speaking about all the time as if they're experts, when maybe 2 months ago they didn't know much about the culture, and maybe didn't even know where it was in the world. But everyone's jumping on right now, and so it sometimes I think can create, yeah, there's just this desire to we want to help, we want to be a hero, we want to change the world for good even, but I do want to do it with others, maybe not as much when it's hard, when no one's looking, when it takes a really long time. I think of William Wilberforce, where it might take 26 years to change this. And yeah, I think I would love to see a little bit more of that resiliency, and I think that's why we need the older generation often in our lives to stay steady. And yeah, that's
Yeah,
everything.
that's a really good question that I didn't give you. So sorry about this one, but and it's probably an important question for people who are listening who are not Gen Zers, right? Like, what do I do? How do I, I'm a dad, so I know what I'm going to do, as far as encouraging and elevating their voice. But how do you think other generations that have come before can, help this generation be the change agents that they want to be?
I think two of the biggest things you can do is regularly speak life and identity, and even affirming gifting in young people. Just me looking at the Bibles in First Timothy, it talks about young people when it says, "Don't let anyone look down on you because you were young." This is Paul to Timothy saying, "Hey, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young." It says instead, but set the believers an example in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. And then actually, 2 verses down from that verse, it says, and do not neglect the gift you have, which was given to you by the prophecy from the council of elders who laid their hands on you. And why that's important to me is like 2 verses down from the next gen verse. Like when I was young, I always thought this is the verse that has like, hey, don't look down on this because I'm young. Like this is the next gen verse of the Bible. And it says 2 verses down, and don't neglect the gift you have, which was given to you, by the way, by the prophecy and the council of elders. And the laying on of hands is what it says. And I think there's a prophecy, or especially in this situation, I think it could be as simple as these 4 letters of "I see in you," specifically just, hey, I see this in you. And I have found that might be one of the most powerful things and easiest things. It's free, that we can do, especially if we want healthy, faithful, strong, resilient, mature young people, and especially our own children, is instead of joining what the culture can sometimes do generation after generation after generation, is just criticize them. Like you can find magazines for every generation that says this is the me generation, or this is like there are Time magazine that talked about boomers, calling them the me generation, front cover. You can find, like if you Google it, you'll see so many magazines that have always talked about the next generation in a way that's like they're selfish, they're just thinking about themselves, they're doing it differently, they're embracing technology so much that they're obsessed, and they're a me generation. And I would just say that's just probably kind of what it's like when you're young and you're single and you're immature, is you just kind of do some of those things. So I don't think that that's that different. But what I would say, instead of jumping on the bandwagon of criticizing, you could either criticize them, or you could, I would say, coddle them, which has also happened a lot, where we're just, instead of criticizing, I'm coddling them. I'm allowing you to live with me as long as you want. You don't have to finish college. You can take your time. And instead, in the middle, there's something I would call coaching. Instead, don't criticize them, don't coddle them, coach them. And there's a difference in the way the coach and a player works together, in that a coach is in the game with you. The coach loses when you lose. The coach really does care, but he cannot and will not step into the game for you. He cannot do the work for you. He will challenge you, but that doesn't mean he's criticizing you, because he's not in the stands just throwing rocks. He's in the game with you. And there's just a difference of a coach mentality towards the next generation, where it's like, I'm calling you higher because I know who you are. I know what's in you. I know what you can see. I see things in you maybe you don't see in yourself. And going back to that verse when he says, don't forget this gift I gave you and I prophesied over you, or I noticed. And I would just say, have a practice of regularly saying, I see in you. Like, hey, I see this gift in you. I see this. I remember the very first time someone did that for me. I was 16. It was the first message I'd ever preached. It was 5 minutes, which felt like a lifetime, even though now this answer is probably 5 minutes long. But at 16, man, it felt long. Like, man, I got to speak for 5 minutes. What am I going to say? I was so nervous. And it's actually on YouTube. Thank God it's so buried that no one would find it, but it's so bad. And I wasn't a good communicator. I had a very small vocabulary, but there was an older man who I've never met before and I've never seen since, who really kind of said that over me. I said, hey, I see this gift in you to speak to your generation, speak about your generation. And he's like, I think you should pursue going to Bible school because you really connected with these young people today here. And yeah, I think that was so powerful that an older person recognized something in me and it just encouraged me and gave me maybe even a next step in light of that. And I would just encourage you with your kids, with others in your workplace, in your church, in your community, and wherever they may be someone who sees things in the next generation and speaks into their character, speaks into their identity, speaks into their competency and their skill set. And just, you have no idea how powerful that can be for a young person.
Yeah, that's so good. And I like the image of a coach because I often have thought about this from the standpoint, I think we're losing that sort of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Luke Skywalker kind of mentality with this generation. Like they don't want to be talked down to from that standpoint, yet they need someone, like you said, to mentor them because they are so passionate. So I like the image of a coach is really nice. Like you said, that you can't go in and play the game, but and you're not throwing rocks at them, but you're there coaching them. It's really good imagery.
And actually, I almost never share this, but you would understand this more than anyone, is like, I said two things. One is see things in people. And then if you would go further, disciple someone in the next generation, mentor someone in the next generation. I strongly believe we don't have a next gen problem. We actually have a discipleship problem. There's always problems in the next generation, but the greatest solution and the greatest young leaders I know, as well as if you're a Christian, like what Jesus dedicated almost all of his time doing was making disciples. It's literally his last words, so it should probably be our first priority. And I talking to you when I said I don't really share this, you know, probably like that book, A Hero with 1,000 Faces. I mean, it's like these classic stories almost always have this young person that's got something in their heart to do something different, to be something different. They're in a unique time, and they know they're built for something else, but they don't have the ability to get there. And it's always the story changes once Obi-Wan Kenobi, once, I mean, there's like so many stories where it's like this young, almost every Disney movie is like this, where some young person runs into someone older who's like, okay, they're like what is that? Wax on, wax off type of Karate Kid. It's like that Karate Kid mentor that you needed to have that's going to take you to the next level. And yeah, they become that sage. And it's the creation and instigation of almost every great story that we know today. And we're kind of missing that in the last couple of generations where we need generations, including even now millennials, that want to be that for Gen Z, not to say, hey, you know, no one did that for me, so why would I do it for you? Or I don't even know how to do it for you. But a generation that kind of steps up and says, hey, for the sake of a healthy future and thriving, we need to step in and be a sage to Gen Z.
That's so good. Yeah, that's really convicting actually, because I looked at this generation and I saw them more like a buddy adventure, you know, sort of like Tommy Boy. And like, it was just, like you said, it's sort of like this community kind of thing. Like we see each other within the concept of we going on this adventure together, you know? And so looking at that sage mentality, I thought that was sort of a thing of the past. It's sort of, you know, just like the Obi-Wan Kenobi effect. I was just like, I think that's gone, you know, like this generation doesn't want that. They want a buddy comedy where, you know, it's Tommy Boy and David Spade, and we're off on this adventure together. But I think what you're pointing out is, yeah, but maybe that's what they're doing, and they're still going to need that sage because, and I like the coach metaphor, because I think the coach metaphor is much different than Obi-Wan Kenobi, because oftentimes the Obi-Wan Kenobis that I know of are like, preaching to the kids, from a place of not really, kind of getting down and understanding that there's things that, like, to me, I've lived my life with my children going, what can I learn from them as much as they can learn from me too, so even though I'm the parent, I'm like, I'm still trying, and it's not just digital stuff, it's not like how to fix my phone or whatever. It's more of, just the mentality. What can I be learning from this generation? So anyway, the last thing I wanted to talk about is I kind of gave a list of different ways in which these characters are changing their worlds. And I just want to read that list real briefly, real quick, and see which one resonates with you the most, as far as when you, or could be one or two of them where you go, yeah, I can see that being, not fortune telling, like, yeah, that's going to be the way this plays out, but more like just resonates with you because you go, I work with this demographic, and I can see this being a part of what happens with them. So here's what I saw. Young people are perceiving the cost of war. That's from Belfast, a little boy kind of perceiving the cost of war that's going around him. From Dune, leading and making alliances to form a resistance within war. So that's definitely a young person having to step up into leadership, right? From the older generation, and then creating these alliances to form resistance. Stepping over battle lines for the sake of love. That's West Side Stories. Identifying the threat and waking up the apathetic in the face of annihilation. Boy, here we are on the brink of of nuclear war, and I'm sitting here going, wow, don't look up. You have the grad students who's trying to wake up this apathetic world going, hey, we're all going to die, Power of the Dog, subtly eliminating the toxic bad guy. And then Drive My Car, helping to process loss and culpability. And then you have in Licorice Pizza, crossing barriers of age. You have Coda, crossing barriers of language. And then in King Richard, you have crossing barriers of ethnicity. Anything that kind of stands out to you or really resonates with that list?
Yeah, can you repeat the one about the threat, the phrase with when it comes to threat?
Yeah, so they're identifying the threat and waking up the apathetic in the face of annihilation. And
Okay.
annihilation may be too big of a word, but that's what's happening in that film. So yeah, to me, this is what I wish would happen with the Russian youth right now, where we are right now, is that they would wake up and wake up the apathetic, So.
It's interesting is I have been sharing this for about a year and a half, that when I look at Saul in the Bible, in the Old Testament, Saul, I don't think we give him any credit for doing something that I think is so powerful, and it could only almost be rivaled by, or could only be one-upped by Jesus. And that's his ability to allow a new generation, David, to take on such a big responsibility in battle. Often I say to, especially business leaders and pastors, is I'll say, we're not losing the next generation because we're asking them to do too much. We're losing them because we're asking them to do far too little. Wow. And the world is asking them to do so much. The world is like, come on, let's go change the world. Let's go do this. And often in the church, at least, it's kind of like, hey, do you want to volunteer in the parking team, or do you want to help with the children? And I'll, so interesting is, like, if I went to another country, I could join a nonprofit and maybe run a big time part of like an orphanage or a sports program or something in a nonprofit in another country, because they just need help, and they'll empower the next generation because they need any help they can get. And today at 19, I could join the military and have a lethal weapon in another country on foreign soil, maybe even operate like a multi-million-dollar vehicle. But in the church today, in America at least, it's like, do you want to hand out pamphlets, or do you want to wave people to where to go on the parking team on 1 hour, 2 hours once a week? It's just like, oh man, I'd rather, if this is the call to action, I got something in me, I want to go and change the world. And so we're losing them often because we give them so little. but the reason why is we don't want to give them anything so big that if they mess it up, which young people just will sometimes, because they're learning and they're falling forward, and they're maturing and they're growing, and that's just what happens as you're doing that. If they mess things up, it will really make an impact in the church or in the nonprofit or in the business. And so when I look at Saul, I was kind of like surprised when I was like, man, I don't know if I could even done this. And I'm an advocate for the next generation, but you get this young guy, David, who has this type of confidence, who's saying, hey, will you let me fight Goliath? You talk about waking up the apathetic, kind of like today. It's like, I think we think of Goliath just showed up and then David happened to be there that day. No, he's there for 40-ish days, and he's taunting them. And it's just this constant taunting of there's tension, there's struggle. There probably after a couple of weeks, days even, you got a military that's like a little apathetic. Like, what are we going to do? We're just like living in this tension of there just is tension. We kind of are in that in a lot of ways today, where it's just like, man, there's constant tension, especially when it comes to the pandemic, of like, when are we going to go back to normal is a lot of the phrasing. We just have learned how somewhat to just live in this tension and almost apathetic to, there just is this looming cloud of problem, whether it's especially the pandemic or terrorism, because there's constant news stories around that, or now Ukraine. It's just like we're learning how to almost live in the tension where you can almost become apathetic, where it's like, I can't keep up with the next shooting or the next pray for this city or pray for this country. And I guess when I go back to David is Saul allows him to fight, and the stakes were huge. The stakes were massive. It's like, if you lose, we have to serve this nation. And I really like that, and I respect even Saul for seeing David and this young person who's like, you are not the profile of a warrior, in the sense that you're not even in battle here. The only reason you're here is because you're bringing food for your brothers. Your own brothers don't even want you to be here. They're kind of asking why you're here. Your dad didn't even really believe in you, which Saul doesn't know, but I mean, for David to know, my own dad didn't even put me on the line to get chosen by Samuel. It's like a story of rejection after rejection after rejection by his father, his brother, and even Saul's like, are you sure, like this? And what I do respect, Saul eventually said, okay, I'll let you do it. And this is so key to today, in my opinion. And Saul didn't make him do it the old way. He didn't say, David, you got to wear this armor. This is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. And I think we're in a time right now where that's really important, that we have a generation that's like, they're identifying this threat, Goliath in David's case, and they're waking up the apathetic. Like, these, after defeating Goliath, it's a whole new world. They're singing songs, they're doing all this, they're celebrating. It's an opposite response to what has been the last 40 days for them. And I just think, man, if Saul would have made David do it the old way and the way we've always done it, if David went hand-to-hand combat in armor with Goliath, I think there's a good chance he could have lost. I think there was a time for something fresh from a new generation. It might even seem like there's no way that's going to work until it worked. And so I think I really resonate with that one right now, because I think that, especially when I'm talking to pastors, I'm like, we gotta learn how to pass the baton. And it doesn't mean when you pass the baton you're irrelevant. And same thing I would say for our nation. Passing the baton and or empowering the next generation doesn't make us obsolete. It doesn't make us irrelevant. In an ideal world, I'd love to think of coexisting and leading together and helping David in these growing years, walking with them and showing, hey, I've been here a couple of years and this is what I would give you advice on. Where things really went south, and sometimes even today can go south, is once they go back and they're singing about Saul, but they're singing about David even more. And there's comparison. Even millennials, this is a big one. I'm it's the first time about 3 years ago, I was speaking at an event for like 70,000 people, and a Gen Z leader was on the panel with me. It was me and him, and he was talking about, hey, I love the older generations like Grant and the millennials. And I was like, what the heck? I'm 29. Hey. You can't call me old. I'm not even 30 at that time. I wasn't even 30 yet. And I felt this Saul, like I was like, this is probably what Saul felt like when they were coming in. They're like, hey, Saul is great, but David's even greater. Yeah. He's like, who's this young guy that getting all this praise? Yeah. And I think, man, if we could just get to a place where we don't care about our name, or our generation being known. We care about legacy, but if we could help the destiny of the next generation, I think it would help the legacy of our generation. And so, yeah, I think that's really crucial today. And we're in this apathetic, almost this numbness to what's going on in our nation. And you got a generation that's dying to be part of something big, something new, something fresh. And I think it's important that we empower them and then walk alongside them. And Lord willing, again, I don't know if you've seen The Chosen, but it's a lot of conjecture in those shows. They don't know if this is what really happened, but I appreciate it. And my conjecture towards Saul and David, if Saul would have worked with David instead of competed with David because of his name being recognized more, is I like to think conjecture wise that maybe Saul didn't have to die, and one of his best friends, Jonathan, didn't have to die because they wouldn't have been on two different battlefields. They would have been together and they could have won those battles together. I like to think that Uriah didn't have to die. I like to think that Saul would have been like, no, you need to be out there with your soldiers. You should not even be here to see Bathsheba. I like to think a lot of things would have happened where Saul lived, Jonathan lived, Uriah lived, Bathsheba, that didn't happen because you have these leaders coexisting instead of feeling like we got to go separate ways, and that made them weaker on both sides. And it's an important time for us to, which is a big message of our day today, is like we need to unite and come together. And it doesn't mean one or the other. It's both of us. It's being better together.
So good, man. Very good. And it plays totally into that idea of territorialism, right? Just the idea of just what you were saying with Saul and David. It was just all of a sudden I get threatened even generationally, and I start creating territories and marking my lines, and marking the lines of that territory. And here you have the opportunity, like you said, it would have changed biblical history if there wasn't those lines, there wasn't that territorialism, there wasn't that toxic masculinity of Saul, even to be so threatened as a man with this boy, kind of thing. So it plays a lot into that, but then like you said, just it gives a different idea for a person like me who is not in that generation to be able to understand the value and the role that I can play moving forward to elevate that generation, elevate the David, elevate the and not be threatened by it, and not think that, throw them aside or think they're too young, like you said, or think they're too narcissistic or whatever, like really be able to see that this generation has the power to be those change agents, and we should get behind that. So thank you, Grant. I really appreciate you bringing a voice to this. So many great stories, so many really good ideas of how to help this generation and how to play into this theme. My biggest thing that I've always told people is as soon as the theme comes out of the Oscars, it's like antennas for me. Throughout the entire year, I want to be a part of whatever I feel like God's doing in the world, that this is his story he's foreshadowing. And so I want to be a part of that. And if Gen Z is, like what we can do as far as maybe, being change agents in our world, then I need to look at these films and see how I can be a part of elevating them. So thanks for giving us a picture of what that looks like today.
Definitely. Thanks for having me, Brian.